So while overall the metabolised energy requirements for camels is generally lower than cattle, for the per kilogram of milk output, that's not necessarily the case. So understanding the metabolised energy requirements for milking camels is vitally important in the camel milk industry. Intensively managed camels also need to be carefully managed to prevent issues like urea toxicity. To discuss these issues, I'm very delighted to be able to have here today to present an expert on camel, a well-known expert, I might add, on camel nutrition, Dr. Rafat Al Jassim from the University of Queensland. Dr. Al Jassim is a nutrition biochemist and gut microbiologist who's currently holds an honorary associate professorship, I don't think you can put more in front of his name, at the Centre of Animal Science, Queensland Alliance for Agriculture, Food and Innovation at the Australian Institute of Bioengineering and Nanotechnologies. Dr. Al Jassim is an animal scientist with specialisation in nutrition biochemistry and gut microbiology and the application to bovine, equine and camel husbandry. He has more than 30 years experience in nutrition research, especially with ruminant animals. Can you please join me in welcoming Dr. Al Jassim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the invitation. Welcome, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great opportunity to be among you. As I always say, it's good to be among friends. And we'll talk today about camel nutrition. It's a dear thing. I'm very passionate about nutrition in general. Most of my work with ruminants and equine. But camel came into my research interest in 2000 and been doing some interesting camel research, particularly with regard to the microbial ecology of the gastrointestinal tract of the camel. So we will talk nutrition and feeding because that's traditionally different. When you talk nutrition, you talk digestion, absorption, metabolism. When you talk feeding, you move very much into the applied science area. So basic nutrition, we talk about requirements. I revisited this area because I get lots of inquiries about camel requirements. We don't have tables for camel requirements. Not like cattle, horses, sheep, goats, where you go to NRC, ARC, the French tables, German, and you look at the requirements. We don't have it. So I tried to develop some equations, some predictions for requirements, and my emphasis is on energy requirements, because it's very important, on protein requirements, and the information we have on maintenance requirement. So we can use the information that we have or available at the present time, and then no harm from extrapolating from beef cattle information at the time being until we develop full requirements information on the camel itself. And I will talk about vitamin E and selenium because it's so important and so many people use it widely, especially in the Middle East for racing camels and for dairy camel, and some feed additives, especially ionophores. Then we give some recommendations. So this is some basic information. What's the maintenance energy requirements? It is required for basic animal functions. That's to maintain life, and that goes into beating of the heart, respiration, and movement against the concentration when there is a transport, an active transport mechanism that requires, as energy dependent, requires energy. So that's all part of the maintenance energy requirement. Basically, when we talk about maintenance energy requirements, it's not only zero growth in the animal, but no change in the energy content of the body. So if you have zero growth, but change in the energy content in the body, this is not maintenance requirement. Okay, so in starved animals, the basal requirements or the maintenance requirement comes from the adipose tissue, from the fat, the breakdown of fat, supply energy. That's where it comes from. And that energy is used, utilized, and dissipated as heat. For production, there is always the synthesis of new tissues. Production, we talk about meat, milk, other products, fiber. It all requires energy. So we look at the classic diagram over here. Gross energy, the energy content of feed, is fed to the animal, and there is some being excreted in feces, and that's a waste. Then what we get, the digestible energy that will be available for use by the animal. Digestible energy, there is further loss in urinary energy and gas energy as methane. And what's left is metabolizable energy, and that is what is utilized by the animal or available to the animal at the tissue level. So this is important. And I like to use metabolizable energy in working out the requirements, simply because we can derive that value from digestible trials. So we only need digestible trials, and we can derive the metabolizable energy values from digestibility. And after that metabolizable energy, some energy will be lost as heat increment. Some will go into net energy, that's the actual energy utilized, and some will be either stored or secreted as products. And the green boxes are what is useful to the animal. The red boxes, the fecal, urinary, and methane is losses, and the heat increment is essential because that is utilized for maintenance and for basal. If we look at and I wanted to give examples from cattle requirements. If we look at the basal requirement, metabolizable energy requirements for maintenance, it's a function of body weight. So the higher the body weight, the more the maintenance requirement. And you can see the R square is 1. That's the coefficient of determination is very high. That means the requirements, the variability in requirements, 100% of the variability in requirements is explained by body weight. So you can estimate with high accuracy. So this is based on the equation that energy requirements for maintenance is 0.396 megajoule per kilogram metabolic body weight. This is an old figure, but it's a good figure and is still valid, and we still use it to construct equations and to develop requirement tables. And once you calculate the metabolizable energy requirement for maintenance, you can develop that or calculate the allowance. You allow for the efficiency at which metabolizable energy is utilized by the animal. You allow a safety margin. Then you calculate allowance. Allowance is what farmers use. How much do you give your animal every day? You're not concerned about where is that going, but this is from practical. How much you give your animal to maintain normal function without production. So this is the calculations for cattle. When we go into camels, we don't have much data for camels. I used an estimate from a respiratory chamber studies, which I believe it is the best available. The best available. It's accurate. It's the best available. And the value is 0.314 megajoule per kilogram metabolic body weight. And you can do the same and construct a requirement. And once again, R square is 1. The requirement is best explained or is a function of body weight. So the variability in X is 100% explained. The variability in Y is 100% explained by X in a linear model. So this is what we have. And you can convert that into allowances. How much do you give your camel to sustain normal function, normal constant, let us say constant from practical point of view, constant body weight, is not gaining, is not losing, is not producing, but that's the maintenance requirement that you have to develop for every, you have to give for every animal, whether producing or not. This is very important, and it has its practical implications. If in the future we do studies and we decide that a smaller frame or medium frame or larger frame camel, any of these categories is supporting more milk production. For milk production, that's what's required. We go for medium frame, then we don't have to keep the larger frame ones because there will be a waste of energy. So determine the relationship between body size and the productivity, and then you probably be able to do selection on that basis. So this is just the practicality of something like this. Then when we compare cattle with camels, we can see that the requirement for camels is much lower than that of cattle. This is very interesting, and lots of researchers, they publish information without providing data. Now that we have this sort of model, this regression equations based on reliable estimates of basal metabolism, we can say that the camel requirement for maintenance is lower than that for cattle. And the same over here, if you look at the requirements, maintenance per metabolic body weight, you get the same thing. When you transfer the values from body weight into metabolic body weight, you remove a lot of the error and you get an R square value of 1. That means 100% of the variability in one variable explained by the other. So you can do prediction with high accuracy. And when we do the allowances, you get the same story. The allowances, what you give your camels, the same weight compared to what you give a cow, the same weight, is much lower. Okay, so this is interesting. When we come into the energy requirement for milk, once again, we don't have estimates for energy requirements for milk. But what we can do, we can calculate the energy value of milk with high accuracy. What's the energy value of milk? The energy value of milk is a sum of the energy values of its constituents. How much fat, how much lactose, how much protein. Energy doesn't come from minerals. So you have fat, protein, lactose, and you can calculate the energy value of the milk. Then if you know the efficiency at which metabolizable energy is converted to milk. Then you can calculate the metabolizable energy for milk. Then you can add sort of a safety margin and calculate allowances. And we do that using this equation. I mean, I can give you the presentation. You can use these equations. Easy to use. Once you get used to it, in Excel file, you can just calculate your requirements. Then taking a good example, looking over here at milk that we reported, I picked up 3 studies, and we have solid non-fat, and we have butter fat values for the 3 reports, and I've taken the average, and you take the value a gram per kilogram, okay, and use that to calculate the energy value of milk. Then convert the energy value of milk into metabolizable energy used to produce 1 kilogram of milk. Then you calculate the allowance. It is using equations which is reliable. These were developed for cattle, but it's reliable because you can modify them by using the chemical composition of camel milk. Then modify them. And what we have at the end been able to develop how much energy we need for each kilogram of milk of certain fat content. Fat is the main determinant of energy value of milk. If you look at the slide before, in the equation over here, 386, that's the energy value of milk, 38 megajoule per kilogram milk fat, 38 megajoule per kilogram fat, while the average for a protein and lactose around 20, because the protein is 24 megajoule per kilogram and lactose is about 17, 18 megajoule per kilogram. So you work out the equation, you estimate the energy value of the milk, and all what you need, you have the energy value of milk, how much milk is produced, then you calculate the energy value for this animal lactating, producing 5 kilogram or 6, 7, 8, depends on how much it produces. When we plot requirements for cattle and camels, you see that the camel requirements for milk is higher than that of cattle. That's simply because so much selection being done, so much breeding and selection being done for cattle, and cattle selected for high productivity, they are more efficient, and camels, they're not subjected. They haven't been through this process of selection. So they're not efficient as cows in producing camels. Adding to that not knowing the genetic potential of camels for milk production. So whether their maximum productivity is 6 kilos or 7 or 8, or some talk about 20 kilos for individuals, we don't know. So the indication for producers are probably you feed as if you are feeding for 6 kilograms, and what goes above that, you will notice that increase in the hump size because it will be deposited as fat. That's any extra energy, whether it's coming from fiber, or starch, or protein, or fat, it will be deposited as fat. Any extra energy. So this is interesting. When we come into protein requirements, I found only one good study in the literature. And it's a PhD program that used a balanced metabolism trial to predict requirements. But in general, before we start, feed that is fed to the animal contains protein. and non-protein nitrogenous compounds. So when we talk about a protein, we talk about true protein. That's in form of polypeptides. And non-protein nitrogenous compounds, any nitrogenous compounds other than the true protein. 40 years ago, when I did my agriculture, we were talking about a black box. That's the rumen. We don't know what's happening down there. And we were sort of investigating metabolism in the rumen and looking at metabolic pathways over there and the role of microorganisms and all these things, but they used to describe it as a black box. Well, over the years, so much light being shed on, and it's clear what's happening there. So you have a protein that is supplied to the animal. It's either degradable, which can be broken down, or undegradable. The undegradable bypass the rumen into the intestine, and the degradable one will be broken into peptides, and peptides into amino acids. Some of the amino acid will be incorporated into microbial protein, especially by protozoa, because the bacteria, they prefer simple nitrogen. They haven't evolved with the capacity to utilize larger molecules. And they're smart. Why do they have to trouble themselves if they can absorb just ammonia by passive diffusion without spending energy and utilize ammonia to build their own protein? Non-protein nitrogenous compounds will all be converted to ammonia, and that's very rapid. When you give urea to the animal, it will be converted to ammonia within 2 hours, all ammonia. And ammonia, depending on the capacity of the microbial population, will be assimilated, will be utilized by the microbial community to produce microbial protein. So microbial protein will travel to the intestine and utilized by the animal. So what goes into the intestine bears little relationship to what gets into the rumen. So this is a big difference between simple stomached animals and between compartmental stomached animals, where you have fermentation process. Of course, some of the ammonia will be absorbed into the bloodstream, into the liver, converted into urea and urea cycle in the liver, and some will be excreted in the kidney, by the kidney in the urine, and some will be recycled back by the salivary glands. One thing about the camel, they are more efficient than the ruminant animals in recycling urea. So one thing to consider, sometimes the protein that gets into the small intestine is more than the protein that gets into the forestomach. That's because of the recycling of nitrogen. So this is important. And the studies that have been done, the one study that I referred to, it's a nitrogen balance study, which we can get some data from. So a review of all the literature got something like 825 milligram per kilogram metabolic body weight, fecal nitrogen 301 milligram per kilogram body weight, and urinary about 400 milligram per kilogram metabolic body weight. This is sort of an ignored area in nutrition. This is the most wasteful, expensive ingredients or nutrients. Very little of the nitrogen consumed by cows, by camels, is utilized and used by the body. If we look at it over here, it is about 72% of the nitrogen that is supplied to the animal is excreted in feces and in urine. What a waste for an expensive nutrient. And we look at the percent of digested protein, it's about 23.5%. 23.5% of the digested protein is retained in the body. And it's only about 15%, only 15% of intake is retained. So 85% is gone. And when we talk about pollution of the environment, nitrogen stands as one of the main pollutants, especially in the dairy industry, in the intensive dairy industry. And we got to be very careful with camels, not to overfeed them, because there will be lots of waste. And taking into consideration that the camel recycle more than cattle. So this is the estimate we got, 349 milligram of digestible nitrogen. You multiply it by 6.25, you convert it into a protein, then you can calculate the allowances. And when you calculate the allowances, you can calculate the allowances of digestible nitrogen or digestible crude protein or gram crude protein per day. And for the different body weights of camels. So this is, I would say, the best set of data that we have in the literature, and I used those estimates to establish this. So this is the best available. No one doing much work in this area. So for protein requirements for milk, we don't have data. So I think at the time being, best to use data from dairy cattle, and that's NRC estimates of requirements per kilogram of milk with different fat percentages. You may say, we don't have this level of fat in camel milk, but some literature reported levels as high as 5.5, so that's why I included it. Another important topic is mineral requirements. It is a kind of topic that need to be revisited, not only to establish requirements for camels, but requirements for other animals. For cattle, it's been ignored a long time ago, as if it's been covered. It's not been covered. There are so many gaps in the literature for mineral requirements, and I picked up vitamin E selenium because of my contacts with the Middle East, and they use vitamin E selenium a lot for racing camels and for camels in general. And we did recently a trial in United Arab Emirates, and I would like to share the results with you. This is what you find, generally speaking, with camels suffering from mineral deficiency. Camels are practicing pica. That's common in animals. Veterinarians, they know that. And it's primarily because of deficiency of magnesium, but other animals are also involved. Other minerals are also involved. So this is what you find, how much sand you find in the gastrointestinal tract of the camel. This is a very interesting trial that we did using different levels of vitamin E and selenium, thanks to Skidmore, Julia, for her help. She used the herd that she is working on in United Arab Emirates, and thanks to Malo, she is a research officer working with Skidmore, for running the trial. So what we did, we gave 3 levels of vitamin E selenium, and we measured vitamin E level at the beginning of the trial. We gave it sort of a a pre-treatment period to adapt the animal for the working environment and to establish sort of a level of selenium, initial level. Then we started giving the supplement at the 3 levels, then we stopped the supplement. The level increased when we started giving the supplement, but it didn't stop. It didn't decrease significantly after we stopped the supplement. Same things happens with selenium. In fact, the level continued to increase after stopping the supplement, and that's very interesting in selenium. And we went to levels up to 4.8. You know, there is recommendation not to give camels selenium more than 2 milligrams per day. And that is following the recommendation by FDA, the Food and Drug Administration in the United States. And when you go and search why did they choose that value, it is results derived from experiments on mice and pigs and nothing to do with. But later on, lots of work being done on ruminants, and they can tolerate much higher level of selenium. The work done in United Arab Emirates, Bernard Faye published some work on that. Others, you can go much higher than that. But the important thing, we don't like to use the umbrella theory, giving too much, because it is sometimes for nutrients that are safe, or they're not showing sort of signs of toxicity when you give it in excess levels. But we wanted to see what happens when you exceed that level. So after getting that result, I wanted to develop our theory for selenium, how it works. Why do we still have an increase after stopping the supplement, and where it goes in the body when it is supplied to the animal. So there are diet and the supplement both provide selenium, some being absorbed, some being excreted in the feces, and when it is absorbed, it goes to the different tissues and organs. Some of these tissues are rapid losers of deposited selenium. Some of them are slow releasers of selenium. And that is how it operates. That's how it operates. So when you stop this supplement, these organs, tissues started to release selenium, some of them faster than others, and maintain a high level of selenium in the blood. So in a practice, if selenium is needed, you may not need to continuously give selenium to the animal. Choose the critical time where you need to supplement selenium, then give doses of selenium for a period of time and allow the biological system to work around utilizing it more efficiently. So this is one thing. And the products now has been developed, so we were involved, and that's a product in the market. Hopefully, with ruminant-protected choline is also to identify the requirement for ruminant-protected choline. This is important. Ruminant-protected choline, mistakenly being considered by many as one of the B complex vitamins, it doesn't fit the criteria of a vitamin. It's required in much higher quantities, and it is not a cofactor in any biochemical pathway. So it's not a B vitamin, it's a nutrient. It's an essential nutrient. I published a paper on that in the British Journal of Nutrition, a review article on choline. That was, I think, last year, so can be accessed. How choline works and why it is important. Animals that undergo a negative energy balance start to break down fat. Fat will be absorbed and will be released, and majority of it goes into the liver. In the liver, fat will be broken down Another story, producing acetyl coenzyme A, plenty of acetyl coenzyme A, and when there is a negative energy balance, it means there is little carbohydrate available. So acetyl coenzyme A plugs into the citric acid cycle. It requires oxaloacetate. Oxaloacetate comes from carbohydrates. So if not enough carbohydrates, acetyl coenzyme A will accumulate and block the citric acid cycle at the start of it, depriving the animal from energy. So what the animal does, there is evolutionary process, and animals get around that, converting acetyl coenzyme A into ketone bodies. And ketone bodies is utilized by the skeletal muscles, utilized by the brain. The brain can meet its about 50% requirements from ketone bodies. The tissue that doesn't use ketone bodies is the blood. The red blood cells use glucose only. So this is an important thing, but the most important thing to avoid having a fatty liver syndrome, the fat has to be exported out of the liver. And the fat is exported as very low density lipoproteins. And choline is vital for the synthesis of very low density lipoprotein and exportation of fatty acids. So providing the animal with energy, other tissues with energy, preventing fatty liver syndrome in cattle. And I would suspect the same thing applies to camel, because I know that camels break down so much energy from the hump. That's what the hump is for. And it's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the hump is as an energy reserve, and the energy that is derived from the adipose tissue is utilized as a much higher efficiency than energy coming from the diet. So it is advisable sometimes to allow the animal utilize body reserve.